Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're diving into something that literally blew my mind. We are looking at an economy that is so incredibly complex, it perfectly mimics real-world macroeconomics. And the crazy part? It's happening entirely inside a video game. We usually think of games as pure escapism, right? Just a place where code magically generates whatever you need out of thin air. But today, we're looking at a system that operates by the exact same economic rules that govern our physical world. It is a fascinating, purely human experiment in free market capitalism. So what if I told you a video game had an annual GDP of $7 million? No way, right? Well, we are going to unpack exactly how quote-unquote fake space money achieves such a massive real-world valuation by exploring the player-driven universe of EVE Online. This isn't just about massive space battles. It's about a deeply intricate, fully functioning economy. How exactly does a digital universe generate the kind of gross domestic product we'd normally associate with a small real-world town? Well, to understand the big picture, we first have to start at the micro level. Let's start with Section 1, the ultimate free market, and how you build an economy from the ground up. To get how this works, you have to understand that in this hyper-capitalist market, there are absolutely zero computer-controlled merchants. Almost every single item in the game is player-made through a rigorous pipeline. Raw materials are literally mined from asteroids by player-run mining corporations. Then those raw ores are physically hauled by player-operated logistics companies across the galaxy to an open market. From there, other players buy those materials, transport them to space factories, manufacture them into usable items like ships or ammo, and then haul them all the way back to an open market to sell. It's a massive, incredibly detailed supply chain. And that is absolutely crucial to grasp. Every single laser blast or warp jump you see involves another human being who spent their actual time and energy mining, transporting, or building that asset. The real-world economic principles of supply, demand, and human labor, they are fully intact here. Which brings us to Section 2, the rise of virtual nations and claiming sovereignty in the stars. So once you understand the massive amount of labor involved, it totally makes sense that players would zoom out and organize to protect their hard-earned assets. At the center of the game's map, you have safe zones, but the further out you go, the rules just vanish. It's totally free territory. So to survive out there, players band together to form sovereign nations. And we're not talking about your standard casual gaming clan here. An EVE Online alliance defends literal borders. They function a lot like a real-world historical city-state, or honestly, a medieval feudal land grant. Players pledge allegiance, they pay taxes in exchange for protection, they have complex military and diplomatic hierarchies, and they run fully structured industrial sectors to fund the whole shebang. The undisputed heavyweight of these digital nations is an alliance called the Imperium, situated in a region known as Delve. They come complete with a bombastic leader who operates much like a traditional, outspoken political figure. They have a massive coalition of players, a centralized capital city, and this is the part that really shocked me, they have a functioning welfare state. Let's dig into that in Section 3, the virtual welfare state and ship replacement programs. You might be wondering, in a totally unregulated, hyper-capitalist digital void, why on earth would a player government just hand out free assets? Well, survival. They operate literal social security systems, making sure that any player who loses a ship in combat gets a replacement immediately. That way, they can get right back to contributing to the alliance's economy and defense. Because if a player loses their ship, they lose their ability to mine, transport goods, or fight. So the alliance leadership steps in, reimbursing players for their losses, and effectively running a massive social safety net just to keep their national cogs turning. Now for the really fun part. Section 4. Calculating a digital GDP by crunching the numbers of Delve. You see, we can actually run these numbers because the game's developers publish a highly detailed monthly economic report tracking regional trade balances. So we can take the standard real-world GDP formula and apply it to the trade data from the Delve region for January 2019. We're literally treating this digital nation exactly how an economist would treat a physical country. We just plug in the variables: household spending, government spending, investment, and net exports. Now, a quick heads up before we do the math. Because EVE Online doesn't have a traditional financial securities market, players buy commodities long-term instead of using a stock market. So when a player invests in long-term assets, it looks identical on the ledger to normal consumption. Because of that, we just roll the investment metric directly into household spending for our calculation. All right, starting with household spending. Players traded 48.6 trillion ISK on the open market and 32 trillion via contracts, which gives us a massive 90.6 trillion in-game currency spent. Even though contracts are usually for higher value, one-off items, economically speaking, it's all just part of the consumer spending taking place within the borders of Delve. Next up is government spending. We can basically reverse engineer the Imperium's welfare program here, showing they spend about 2 trillion ISK replacing destroyed ships that month. Since the Exact Alliance treasury numbers are kept private, players literally scrape third-party combat logs to calculate exactly how many ships were destroyed and eligible for Social Security replacement. That gives us a really solid 2 trillion ISK estimate for government expenditure. And what about trade? Well, they exported 9.2 trillion ISK and imported 5.8 trillion, resulting in net exports of 3.4 trillion ISK, meaning they're a net exporter, sending out way more value to the rest of the digital galaxy than they're bringing in. So, adding all of that up, the Imperium's total monthly GDP for January 2019 was a staggering 96 trillion ISK. That's 90.6 trillion in household spending, 2 trillion in government welfare spending, and 3.4 trillion in net exports. Just look at how massive that household spending piece is. It really highlights how hyperactive the citizens of this virtual nation are, just constantly trading, upgrading, and manufacturing under their own power. It brilliantly illustrates the sheer dominance of consumer spending compared to those relatively tiny slivers of government welfare and net exports. Let's wrap this up with Section 5, Real Money, Fake Space, where we convert ISK to US dollars. Okay, 96 trillion ISK in a single month is a fun number, but let's annualize it to really make sense of it. Assuming January was an average month, and historical data says it generally is for them, multiplying by 12 gives us an annual GDP of over 1.1 quadrillion ISK. That is a 1 followed by 15 zeros. But to put that into a perspective we actually understand, we need an exchange rate. And here is where it gets real. We actually have a hard, mathematically sound conversion rate thanks to an item called Plex. Plex is an in-game item that grants a 30-day premium subscription, and it costs exactly 12 real dollars, or 2 billion in-game ISK. Because the developers legally allow players to buy this subscription item with real cash and then sell it to other players for in-game currency, we can do the math. When you use that official exchange rate, the annual GDP of just this one single player-run nation equates to nearly 7 million US dollars, or about 3 million on the black market. Keep in mind, officially converting ISK back into US dollars is against the rules, but on black market sites where players illegally trade currency, that 1.1 quadrillion ISK is still worth an eye-watering $3 million. And remember, this is just one faction in a massive game. The scale of this is just absurd, right? But here's why this really matters. Whether you're trading wheat in Chicago or digital spacecraft in New Eden, the fundamental rules of macroeconomics absolutely still apply. You can strip away the physical world entirely, but as long as human labor, time, and scarcity are involved, complex economies will naturally form. We're seeing supply and demand, inflation, government spending, and international trade naturally emerge, purely from human behavior. Ultimately, EVE Online is this pristine sandbox. It offers us a fascinating, purely human experiment in free market capitalism, stripped of all real-world regulations. It's a place where we can watch economic theory play out in real time, managed not by central banks, but by the raw, unfiltered will of internet spaceship meme lords. So, let me leave you with this thought. If these virtual nations are already producing millions of dollars in real macroeconomic value today, how long before digital borders start blurring the lines of our physical global economy? As these virtual spaces grow more and more sophisticated, the labor and value generated inside them is becoming undeniably real. Thanks for exploring this incredibly complex digital economy with me today. It really makes you rethink what constitutes a real economy, doesn't it?